This is Midweek Politics with Dave Pakman.
Hey, welcome back to Midweek Politics. I'm David Pakman, streaming live at midweekpolitics.com. On today's bonus show, after the show, we'll be talking the behind the scenes of the Orly Tates interview, and you'll be interested to hear what she accused me of in some emails that went back and forth before the actual interview. We'll talk about whether there's room for sexual diversity in Islam. There's been a British teen banned for life from the U.S. for criticizing Obama. And also GOP officials are now admitting that the GOP is racist. So let's get to this story about tax cutting. This is an interesting story. Let me tell you a story, Lewis, about tax cuts and class warfare, because this is just a fascinating story. John McCain goes on the Chris Wallace show, and he says to Chris Wallace, you know what, we should extend those Bush tax cuts on the very rich, and then he connects them to class warfare. Let me play this for you, give you a sense of what's going on first with John McCain, and then I'll give you some analysis. And you tell me, Lewis, whether it's accurate or not.
The first thing we need to do is extend the tax cuts that are in existence so people will have that certainty.
Well, let me ask you about that, because the Democrats are talking, and this is all reportedly at this point, about framing it this way. Let's end the tax cuts for the wealthy and use that $35 billion instead to have targeted tax cuts for small business that does most of the hiring and for lower income employees. Would you support that?
Well, let's get into the old class warfare again. Let's get the rich. Just extend the tax cuts. Then let's talk about the payroll tax holiday, which for small businesses, which is something we have fought for a long period of time, and pay for it out of the unused stimulus funds.
Right. So first of all, by the way, as poorly as Barack Obama is doing, Lewis, can you imagine if this guy was president right now?
I can't. That was a horrible non-answer right there.
So first of all, let's make sure the rich are taken care of, and we're going to keep our tax cuts. And my wife, Cindy, the beer baron, the beer heiress, whatever you want to call her, keeps her tax cut. Then we'll explore stuff which will help everybody else and will help a high number of people. I mean, if I was McCain, I might feel the same way, right? His wife is the beer heiress. Her family's beer distributorship certainly brings in a ton of money. Mm-hmm. I'm sure the number of houses McCain has at his disposal could directly relate to the Bush tax cuts. I could understand why he might feel this way.
Right.
But McCain is right, in a sense, that this is class warfare going on with the Bush tax cuts, but it's against the middle class. It's not against the rich. It's not get the rich. And I'm not making this up. There's numbers that will clearly explain it. Let me show you this image here for our viewers on television, and I'll describe it otherwise, of the share of income that the top 10% of those in the U.S. make. And I think we will have it. We'll have it briefly. And if you take a look at it, the share of income that those in the top 10% had was very high leading up to the Great Depression. Very, very high. And then after the Great Depression, and here we have the image, you can see it just absolutely goes way down to about somewhere between 30 and 35%. During the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, it stays pretty level. And that's the time that we know real wages were steady or increasing overall for the country, which means that was good for the middle class. And then as we get into the 80s and certainly through the 90s and very certainly in the last 10 years, the percentage of income controlled by the top 10% goes way up, all the way up to 50%, Lewis, in 2007, which is a lot. 10%, the top 10% of income earners earning half of all the income in the country. So, by the way, it's not that the top 10% were doing poorly during the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. I mean, they were still the top 10%, right? And we know that they were doing well anyway. Forget about the subjective stuff, the golden years, time of opportunity, all of that stuff. Real incomes were steady and increasing up until the 80s. Now, in the 80s, the rich start to accumulate even more wealth. Real average incomes, though, start to decline. The average hourly wage, the average hourly income goes down, yet the richest people continue to accumulate more and more wealth. It's class warfare all over again, is it not, Lewis? Now, just a couple of years ago, the top 10% in the U.S. went over 50% very briefly, but McCain says, first of all, let's make sure we keep the taxes low for the very rich. Like who?
Like his wife.
Exactly. Then we'll think about, payroll taxes or stuff that affects most people. Here's a look at actual hourly earnings, just so you know that I'm not making up the fact that they did go down. Take a look at that graph, and what we're showing here on our screen is that from the mid-70s, all the way to now, with the exception of a short period a few years ago, real average hourly earnings have decreased. So this is not just a made-up thing that the rich do better and everybody does better. No. We see that when the wealth is most concentrated towards the top 10%, top 1%, real wages are going down and the middle class is actually not doing well. If you look at the top 1%, it's even more shocking. Just before the Great Depression, 24% of the wealth in the country was held by the top 1% of income earners. That's the exact same number where we are now. It went down during the 50s, 60s, 70s. I'm no communist, right, Lewis? We will get emails saying I am.
Right.
I have no problem with people making as much money as they want to, but we don't need to go out of our way, like McCain says, to first make sure that we're getting the rich as much tax money back as possible and then worry about everybody else.
And would it really be that bad for them? I mean, just for comparison's sake, in Sweden, you're taxed based on how much you make, and you can be taxed up to 90% of your income.
Well, that seems a little crazy even for me.
It does. That's usually only huge businesses, but still.
I don't like the sound of that.
No.
Don't confuse that with anything I'm in favor of.
No, I'm not in favor of that either. Of course, it's a completely different system. But
what's clear is that the trickle-down has not worked.
Oh, no.
I mean, we know that. I hate to say it over and over again. If you're already rich, you're more likely to save those dollars than to buy stuff with them. If you're making the average wage...
That was just Bush campaign rhetoric.
If you're making about $50,000 a year and you get a tax cut, you will likely spend that money, or you're at least more likely to spend it than somebody who has a ton of money. So from 1980 to 2005, to wrap this up, from every dollar that the national income increased, 80 cents went to the top 1% and 20 cents went to the other 99%. If that doesn't suggest the state of where these tax cuts are actually going, I don't know what does. Midweek Politics is made possible in part by the Daily Hampshire Gazette and GazetteNet.com, connecting our communities with local news and information. By the National Priorities Project and Smith College Department of Government, hosting Congresswoman Donna Edwards on Sunday, October 3rd. More information at nationalpriorities.org. By DIF Design, specializing in custom business websites at difdesign.com. To find out more about underwriting Midweek Politics, visit midweekpolitics.com.